European authorities scramble to contain a second wave of coronavirus infections. The government in France is warning of difficult decisions to come. At least 8 students killed and hundreds injured in Peshawar after a powerful bomb ripped through a Muslim seminary school. Pakistani authorities fear the death toll will mount. And 1 week to go until the presidential election in the United States, both candidates hitting crucial swing states, leaving nothing to chance. We begin with the latest on the coronavirus pandemic here in France. The government is warning of difficult decisions in the days to come. President Emmanuel Macron is holding meetings with his defense council today and tomorrow, and the Prime Minister is meeting with union leaders and members of the opposition. The government is trying to balance fighting the virus without doing too much damage to the economy. Julia Seeger reports.
The French government is looking at different options to try to avoid having to put the entire country on lockdown. The first option, of course, would be to extend the current curfew that's established between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. for 2 and 3 French people. They could extend it geographically or also time-wise. They could also decide to impose a lockdown, but only during weekends. And the third option would be to impose a lockdown on the entire country, as what happened back in March. They're doing so because the number of cases of COVID-19 diagnosed every day is increasing exponentially, and they want to avoid hospitals being overwhelmed with patients. We know that there aren't enough beds in intensive care units. As of now, there are about 2,500 people in intensive care units for about 5,800 beds. Now, the health ministry has promised to increase the number of beds to 12,000, but we haven't seen any of it yet. And the situation is even more tense this time around because the entire country is now concerned by this COVID-19 pandemic, whereas back in March, only 2 to 3 regions were considered as COVID-19 hotspots, and transferring patients from one hospital to another at the time was still possible.
Coronavirus cases continue to mount in countries throughout Europe. The World Health Organization is warning of the continent needs to step up its fight against COVID-19. Now, Germany was once praised for its initial response, but says it could have 20,000 cases a day by the end of the week. Chancellor Angela Merkel will meet with the leaders of 16 states tomorrow to decide on new restrictive measures. The Czech Republic is set to implement a curfew to curb a rise in infections. This after shutting bars, restaurants, fitness venues and most shops. Over in Italy, anger has been pouring out onto the streets of several cities over fresh measures which were intended to limit the spread of the virus. Trams were vandalized in the city of Milan and bins set on fire. Anti-riot police fired tear gas at groups of young people throwing glass bottles and other projectiles. In other news, at least 8 students have been killed and 136 others left wounded after a powerful bomb ripped through a Muslim seminary school on the outskirts of Peshawar. According to the police, the attack took place as a prominent religious scholar was delivering a lecture. Authorities fear the death toll will mount, and for now, there has been no claim of responsibility. For more on this story, here's France 24's Shazeb Walla reporting from Islamabad.
At this time, there are more than 110 injured people that are being treated in different hospitals of Peshawar, and 8 people have died in the blast that happened in the morning at in the Jamia Zubairiya Madrasa, that is an Islamic school in the city of Peshawar. According to eyewitnesses, hundreds of students of the seminary had gathered in the main hall for a lecture on Quranic studies. And when the bomb blast took place. And that's when the bomb blast actually took place. Security agencies are saying that it was a planted bomb and the bomb was brought inside the madrasa in a bag. One thing that is important to mention here is the fact that intelligence agencies in the city of Peshawar had actually issued a threat warning a few days back that there can be an attack on political or religious gatherings in the city. But still this attack took place. And until now, no group has claimed responsibility of this attack.
Shazeb Walla reporting there earlier from Islamabad. Now, 1 week to go until the presidential election in the United States. The Democratic candidate Joe Biden and President Donald Trump are leaving nothing to chance in the home stretch. They're hitting crucial swing states. Biden is set to be in Georgia today, while the president heads to Michigan. For more, we can bring in France 24's international affairs commentator Douglas Herbert. Good to see you, Doug.
How are you?
The campaign is in full swing. Just 1 week.
More than full swing.
More than full swing, but a massive chunk of the population has already voted.
Yeah, this is a real phenomenon, this historic election. Combination of things going on. We have seen massive record numbers of early voting turnout. And by early voting, we mean people who do what's called in-person, physically present, absentee ballot voting. They go to a site and vote early. And people who mail in their postal ballots. And it's a combination of people wanting to vote safely because of the coronavirus pandemic, not have to physically go to polls. Other people who just simply want to avoid the overcrowding of Election Day. They want to get it done early, but also the passion of this election, which has really been pitched and cast as perhaps the most important election of Americans' lifetime, between two candidates that are really polar opposites. So a lot of, on both sides, a lot of enthusiasm, and it's driving the numbers. Now, what you have is 66. Can we show those numbers? This is according to the United States Electoral Election Project, and they compile numbers on the number of early ballots and early voters. As of this morning, Tuesday morning, 66 million plus, that's actually going up as I speak, early ballots have been cast. And what's amazing about that is half of those ballots, about half of them, are in a dozen or so of the most competitive states, because you have the Electoral College, because the U.S. election is not determined by the number of people who vote, the popular vote, but by the electoral vote. It comes down to a handful of these competitive states. So it's significant that almost half, tens of millions of these ballots are in these most competitive states right now. So you have a lot of early voting in these battleground states. And what's really interesting, states like Texas have already seen about 87%. The early voting is 80% of the total ballots cast in the last election. So if you just count the number of early ballots that have already, it's almost 8 million in Texas already. That's almost the totality of all the votes cast in that state back in 2016. And a lot of other states are following similar types of patterns right now. A real phenomenon, this election.
So what can we make of these large numbers of voters that have already gone to the polls?
It begins with a caveat. First of all, don't make too much of it. The conventional wisdom is, early voting. That means all the Democrats are turning out. That means it's good for Joe Biden. Yes, but no, because it's more subtle than that. You can't, on the surface, predict any outcomes from early voting. It is very true that Democrats are more eager. They tend to be more eager about early voting than Republicans. A lot of that has to do with the very diametrically opposed views between Democrats and Republicans, very broad brushstroke generalization in their approach to coronavirus. The Republicans are more inclined to turn out in person on Election Day and vote. That is when Donald Trump is hoping to get the big numbers there. So the Republicans are looking at all these early voting numbers, and it's true that in some cases there's been many higher numbers, at least in states that report the party registration of voters. Millions of more Democrats have voted than Republicans in this early voting drive. But like I said, you have to take that with a little bit of a grain of salt, because the Republicans do tend to turn out in droves on voting day, which is one of the reasons why you keep having Trump, tweeting to the effect that the vote must stop on November 3rd. He is counting on that physical in-person vote on the actual day itself. I'll just note some officials are taking measures, Delano, in certain states like Texas. The Republican governor there is trying to make it harder to vote early by only having one drop-off box in each of the counties. Some counties have millions of people.
Let's talk about mail-in ballots, because the Supreme Court has made a ruling on mail-in ballots in the state of Pennsylvania.
Yes. Democrats and civil rights groups had requested, and they brought this case to the Supreme Court, basically to be able to extend the deadline for being able to count mail-in ballots in the swing state, the pivotal state of Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin is so important because Donald Trump narrowly won that state in 2016 and helped give him the election, that along with Michigan and Pennsylvania. He is shown in most of the polls right now trailing in Wisconsin. So the fact the Supreme Court has now basically blocked this bid to be able to count the mail-in ballots for it was up to 6 days after Election Day, November 3rd. That is, in the view of a lot of the people who brought this case, it basically disenfranchises voters. The Democrats say it essentially disenfranchises endangered voters, people who would not have felt safe being able to go vote in person, and it essentially deprives them of a vote. The Republicans dismiss that out of hand. They say this is nothing about disenfranchising voters. That is democratic, malarkey, as Joe Biden might say. This is only about they don't want to be judicial activists deciding election rules so close to Election Day. They don't want judges rewriting election rules. They say they should leave it to state and elected officials in each of the states to decide these things. But at the end of the day, the fact of the matter is it risks that thousands, perhaps even tens of thousands of votes fewer might potentially be counted as a result of this decision. You have to have marked your ballots. The Democrats right now getting out, trying to tell people, vote now, vote quickly, get your ballots in by November 3rd, or else they won't be counted.
We'll see what happens. It's going to be a tough one. Doug, thank you very much for that. Douglas Herbert there. Now, elections will be taking place in the Ivory Coast this weekend. Back in March, President Alassane Ouattara said he wouldn't seek a third term in office. The decision was praised at home and abroad, but after the death of his chosen successor, he's back on the campaign trail. Ouattara's candidacy is controversial, but the 78-year-old is promising this will be his last campaign.
President Ouattara is in full campaign mode. His bid for a third term has been controversial, but that didn't stop tens of thousands of people from coming to this rally to see him defend his record in office.
Do you have electricity? Do you have water? Do you have roads? Do you have classrooms? Do you have health centres?
Hugely improved infrastructure and economic growth of 8% annually since 2011, these are Ouattara's main selling points.
He's the only president who has led Ivory Coast to progress. Look how our GDP has grown.
But the opposition considers his candidacy illegal. Protests across the country have led to dozens of deaths since August. Many NGOs and human rights groups decry the government's crackdown on civil rights.
We have observed the restriction of certain liberties. There have been bans on protesting in public. But at the same time, when it is supporters of the ruling party, we have seen that they have been allowed to protest on many occasions.
The government rejects any accusation of unfairness, saying the debate around the legality of the third mandate is over. Ouattara's bid was approved by the Constitutional Court. After the death of Amadou Gon Coulibaly, Ouattara's chosen successor, the president said he had no choice but to run again.
It's not a presidential term that I would have wanted to do. I will do it out of civic duty. I consider that my country needs me. It will allow me to build a new team that will take over as soon as possible, I hope.
The president has hinted that if he wins again, he may stand down during his term in office, making way for a new generation, this time for real.
Now, Poland's Prime Minister has condemned nationwide protests which have gripped the country after a ruling by the highest court last week. It amounts to a near total ban on abortions in the predominantly Catholic state. The Prime Minister says the protests against the decision are tantamount to acts of aggression. Jean-Emile Jamin reports.
They've labelled it a woman's hell. 5 days since Poland's Constitutional Court passed its controversial abortion ruling, thousands of women's rights activists defied pandemic restrictions once again, voicing their anger.
What this law will do is put women's lives in danger because there will be less prenatal screening. It will put children's lives in danger because they will not be tested through prenatal screenings. We will not be able to have surgery for fetuses.
Poland already has some of the most restrictive abortion laws in the European Union, but government's latest ruling has tightened these measures even further, making it illegal for women to have abortions despite carrying deformed fetuses. Abortions will now only be permitted if a pregnancy threatens the woman's health or is the result of rape or incest. Supporters of the ruling insist it will stop the abortion of fetuses diagnosed with Down syndrome, but many have warned only to expect a rise of illegal procedures.
The truth is there's going to be a chain of illegal underground abortions now, which means that a lot of them will be conducted in inhumane conditions, completely horrific conditions.
The coat hanger symbol, a reference to illegal abortions, could be seen in protests across the country on Monday. stretching from Warsaw to Krakow and Katowice, as well as other rural conservative stronghold areas. Calls echoed for Poland's right-wing government to step down, while protesters also took aim at the country's Catholic Church. More demonstrations are planned across Poland later this week, including a mass gathering in Warsaw on Friday.
That's it from me. Thank you very much for watching.